We are the, we are the audiovisual division of the American Translators Association. Today we have a very exciting chat with an expert on video games, who's Carme Mangiron. She's a genius. I mean, she knows everything we have to know about video games. So we'll ask her many questions about this interesting topic. Well, without any further ado, I mean, because Carmen is waiting, I will try to join her into the conversation. Let me see. Here she is. Great. Hi, Carmen. Hello.
Hello.
How are you?
Good, thank you. And you?
Fine, very well, thank you. Well, I'm here ready to ask you thousands of questions. about not thousands, but a lot of questions about video game localization. So, first of all, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I have a degree in translation studies and also a PhD in translation studies, but I worked for many years as a translator, doing bits and pieces of everything, but a lot of software, localization, and also in 1998 I started with video game localization, and currently I do little translation and I work more in academia. I am also the program director of the MA in audiovisual translation at the Universitat Autonomous of Barcelona, and a lecturer and researcher, the whole lot at that university.
Great. That's great. And how did you start in video game localization? Have you always played video games?
No, like I've always been a casual gamer, like the usual things, but casual. But at the time that I started in 1998, there weren't that many Japanese into Spanish translators. So oh, there's an echo. What about now? Is now better? I think I took this. Would that be better? Is the sound better?
Yeah, I think I put my headphone.
Okay, sorry. I tried, but yeah, we'll go without anything. So anyway, you might have heard of the Final Fantasy role-playing series from Japan, and Final Fantasy VII was really, it's very successful, but the localization got really. And at that time, they contacted a vendor in Ireland so that they would help me do it because they had no experience. And basically, this LSP ran the university and talked to my Japanese teacher and said, "Could you recommend a few people?" And that's how. So I got a phone call saying, "Would you like to translate Final Fantasy?" And I was there. Why not? Even though I never played it or anything like that. So I had to go through the selection process and all that. There were a few of us, but I was lucky. So I ended up starting to work in the Final Fantasy series.
Wow. That's and Japanese or English?
Both, but like when I started the first Final Fantasies, they were 100% Japanese because they didn't have any audio. So it was just text to PlayStation 2, so you could have DVDs with audio, and that was a big change in localization practices because we had dubbing, subtitling, and because they only dubbed from Japanese into English, it was quite unusual because we were working with two source languages. So everything that was audio, we were translating from English, but everything else, like the in-game, the user interface, the menus with all the objects, the messages, the non-playable character dialogue, all these things, we translated from Japanese. So we were working with, English and Japanese, and that's been the same, for the rest of Final Fantasy games. So So both.
That must be really hard. What is the process of video game? How does how does it?
Yeah, well, once the decision, the company decides to localize, which they think about very carefully because it's money. And I've heard many developers say that localization is a necessary evil. And I also heard somebody say it's like going to the dentist. You're really afraid and you think it's going to be painful, but after all, after the whole process, the result is good. So basically, once they decide to do it, they usually appoint a localization coordinator in-house, and then it depends quite a bit whether it's an in-house localization or it's outsourced. I've always worked in, well, not always, but 90% of the time in-house model, and then if the game is finished, which now is not so longer the case, usually now they prefer to start localizing as they develop, because that's cheaper and faster. But if the game is finished, the first step is called familiarization. So you play the game. So we used to play the game in order to get to know the characters, the game mechanics, to do the glossaries for that particular game, a style guide, because usually if it's a big enough game, there's going to be more than one translator. So for consistency issues. And the thing now, if it's an outsourced and the game is being developed, then you don't really have that familiarization. You cannot play, but they will send you, hopefully, a localization kit that has, information about the game as well, glossaries, translation memories on top of the file, screenshots. Okay.
I we have a call. If you can use your head.
Okay, I'll try. we try again. Yeah. Sorry.
I don't know why this. No, that's okay.
Let's see. I'm gonna have to go like this. Sorry, because otherwise I can't put the phone standing. Sorry, it's all very complicated. Let's see if now it's better. Apologies for this, and we tried.
Don't worry, we are live. That's why.
Okay, is this better now?
Yes, much better.
Oh, okay, better. Okay. So because I started with, I'm sorry, because I tried to. Now I'm kind of out of the picture. Okay, like something like this. Okay. Sorry.
And can you turn the phone, or is it impossible?
Sorry.
Can you turn the phone to the right? There. Yes.
Okay, yeah, like this. Right. Sorry, it's just because if I have it standing, but more or less, that's okay. Okay, so is that okay? Good. Sorry. Anyway, so there's always a familiarization, or it's called pre-localization, when you get to check, as I said, any material that you have, and if you can play the game, you. Oh, good. Thank you, Mara. You kind of play it, and if not, you look for demos or, anything that they pass you, great. And if they don't pass you any materials, what I always do or tell my students to do is find out what kind of games, does this company do? Are there any previous games of this saga? What genre is it? Is it a first-person shooter? If so, look at other ones. So basically, I think as in any translation work that we do, like documentation, as we say in Spanish, la documentación, it's key, looking for information. So that's the pre-localization. And again, this is a great time when there is a team of translators, even if you are not in-house, but working remotely, to agree on how are we going to call, these items or these techniques, etc. And then you start with the translation proper. Usually, if there are several translators, you do your own bit, and then there might be a cross check, like review between the translators. And then there's usually a further quality check, which is a team of reviewers that can be, that usually are not working in the project. So, because that's fresh eyes, and usually they do not change it. They just write comments or suggestions. And then it comes back to you. In other cases, there's also especially when working from Japanese, the figure of an editor. And that editor sometimes doesn't even speak Japanese. And they're just going to look at your translation and not even look at the original, but just try and make it sound, more natural in the target language. And this is after the review, and then there's the review, and then we have I didn't explain that very well. Like, if there is an editor, he usually works after it's reviewed, and if not, it's just translation, review, and then a localization engineer. Usually we don't do that. They do the implementation. So basically, that's the first time that we are going to see our gaming context, because it's implemented in the game engine, and then the QA. The quality assurance process, or quality control, or debugging, it's also called, starts. And then there's two kinds of testing. There's the functionality testing, mainly to check, and this is more important for developers, because that the game doesn't crash, it doesn't freeze, that everything does what it's supposed to do. For example, if you throw a spell, that what you see in screen is actually what you should be seeing. And then there's the linguistic testing, which is more relevant for us as translators, and this is more to check for accuracy and a lot the text in context, because imagine, you're from the AV, most of you are interested or working in AV. If you have to translate a movie without seeing it, I'm sure it might have happened, in some crazy scenario, but it's mad. And with a video game as well, because the body language, especially if you're translating a Japanese game or a Korean game or Chinese, where the body language is so different. So therefore, that's the first time where you can see, oops, that doesn't quite work. Oh yeah, that works perfectly, because even if you've played the game, you haven't seen it all. And if you haven't played it, even more so, you a lot of the time you're half guessing, unless they have given you a lot of notes in the file or in the translation memory system that you're using, some contextual notes or things like that. But it's not always the case. So therefore, usually the QA process is longer than the translation because of all this. And maybe if you've sometimes seen, a game that you thought, ooh, who translated that? A lot of the time it's not the translator's fault, it's just the conditions, in which you work. You don't have access to the visuals of the game most of the time. Maybe in the QA process, they didn't see it, or they rushed it, or whatever, you never know. But anyway, and once you've done this, if it's a console game or a game for iOS, for example, you need to submit it for a license, to publish it. And once that's done, it goes into production and it's sold. And if it's a PC game or a game for Android, you don't need, there's not that second QA process by the license holder. So that's a bit easier and cheaper for the company.
That's right. Yes, I know what you say about not seeing the visuals, because it happened to me once. I translated just one video game in my entire life, in 20 years of audiovisual translation, and I didn't have the image or context or whatever it was. I was desperate. I didn't know what to do. I asked so many questions, and they told me, don't worry, somebody will check this later on, and we'll do QC and see that everything fits. But it's like you're blind.
Exactly. That's it. Like actually in the academic literature, they call it blind translation or blindfolded translation. And sometimes when I'm teaching, I say to my students, it's about risk management, like what option is not the best, but what is the one that is more likely to work if I don't know if it's a female or a male or open. Okay, is this an order? Is this like, a sign in a shop? Am I talking to one person, two people? Ooh. So always think of what's more likely. And as you said, Daniela, then the QC, the quality control, QA, they're going to find all these things. Hopefully, they should find them.
Yeah, and that leads to my other question. Do you have to be a gamer to be a translator specializing in video games? Is it necessary or not?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question, and that's really, that's a hot topic, a burning issue in video game localization. And I always give a very controversial, reply to this, which I think, no, you don't have to be a gamer, but it is definitely easier. Okay, but I always tell my students, because I wasn't a gamer and I don't know anybody who started, the early wave, kind of the older people who started like in the late 1990s, early 2000s, not one of us was a gamer. And, and we did quite well. So the learning curve is steeper, of course, because I can see that as well when I'm training. People who play usually, the terminology, what kind of game it is, where could this appear, is this an order or is this a head, a quest, header or something like that. But I had many good students. If you're a good translator, you can become a very competent game localizer as well. And I have students who are not gamers, who are working on this, no problem. But, it's going to be a bit more painful at the start and the effort that's going to be required. But I don't think it's necessary. Having said that, the companies really value that people are gamers or at least know about games. Like if you go for an interview for Blizzard or Square Enix, they're going to ask you, what games do you play? In some game tests, they even ask you to write, kind of a review or a critique of a game and stuff like that. So even if you are not, you have to do a lot again of looking and checking and reading what kind of games do they do and all this.
And can you lift your phone a little bit so we can see your face? Great.
Sorry, it keeps dropping. You should
okay.
See, I have a very strange setup, but anyway, sorry.
Yes, I can imagine. Me too. I have everything on the table.
Yeah, I have books, to lift it.
Yeah, I know. Don't worry. And what about, you said when you go to the interview, do you work in-house when you're a video game translator, or can you work remotely as we subtitlers usually work?
Yeah. Both ways. Like most companies, if it's a developer or a publisher, they will have a small translation team, one or two, and then they also have usually language service providers, LSP or translation agencies, that kind of trusted partners. They might have 4 or 5, and then they use them. And then, of course, those translation agencies, they have their own translators that they work for. And even what happens quite often is that the gaming companies, for example, they like your work, and then they request that, all those titles or titles of that series, that translator does them. The only thing is, and I see it in the chat, that some people, it goes so fast that I can't answer, but maybe at the end, but some people are explaining how traumatic it is to translate the Excel file with nothing else, no context. So that's quite, that's quite tough.
I think you'll get used to it once you...
Yeah, you develop, exactly. It's all about experience and practice, and that's why it is easier if you're a gamer, because you might have a bit more of a intuition. So basically, you start off a little bit faster, but I think I've seen many good students who are now professional game translators, and you catch up very quickly. And as you say, Daniela, after you've done your first game, gained a lot of experience. Your second game, third game, and then you're kind of, blindfolded. Oh, it's okay.
So that's great because there's hope for us. I mean, for us,
definitely, yes.
Who never
Yes.
worked on the game, we can start. I mean, we have to learn a lot, of course, but we can start. That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yes, I definitely think so. And I think the main thing is if you do a good translation test, it doesn't matter if you have experience or not, you're in. And often as well, they put this translators comment column in the Excel, like the tests are always in Excel. And even if you make some mistakes, but they see, and you're right, I wasn't sure about this because I would need context or I would check with the client. And then they think, a lot of potential here. So that's it. Oh, I know what I was going to say. The problem is confidentiality. Like they usually do not send the game or the screenshots because they're afraid that there's going to be leaks. But I've never, ever heard of a translator leaking anything because it'd be like shooting your own foot, because if they won't they won't hire you again. So, but yeah,
it happens when you work on high-profile theatrical projects, like the superheroes movies, and you cannot see the movie. I mean, it's the same. I mean, you have the audio, you don't have any. Everything's blurred, and you just see small faces. But you need context. I mean, sometimes you need the image, and I understand that part because it happened to me many, many times, and I hate it. But anyway, in the end, somebody will review the image and text, and we'll see that everything fits. But yes,
exactly. Yeah, but as as translators, because we want to do our work so perfect, and we're so, I don't know, we don't feel at ease. But I think at one point, as you say, that you're just kind of one step in the chain. Like there's going to be then, I don't know how many people testing the game, or if you work in-house, you're also working in the testing process. So hopefully, most of the time, most of the bugs get fixed, but some of them, of course, get out there, and then the fans go crazy, on the blogs and discussion forums. So you're really exposed, as a game translator. I'd say game subtitler or as well, because the fans are very technologically savvy, and if they follow, so you're exposed. But what can you do?
It happens. I mean, once you translate audiovisual content, especially video games, there's so much expectation. The new releases and everything. I mean, I know how it is because I read some reviews and I read comments, and sometimes I think to myself, well, but they don't know how long it takes to develop this, or how long it takes to translate, or how difficult it is. But anyway,
exactly.
Go on a crusade and discuss. We have an argument.
Little by little, we'll get there. The conditions are are getting better as well. Like, I think developers are getting more aware, of the need of context, and we just need to keep, as they used to say when I was training to get translated, educate the client. Like you have to educate them because they don't know. They don't know context. What is that? They haven't even stopped to think about it. Once they do, I think their perception starts changing. So there is hope, Daniela, definitely.
Okay, that's great. That's great to hear. And what happens when, I mean, you said you don't have to be a gamer to be a video game translator. And somebody asked earlier, how long does it take to do a game, to complete a game like Final Fantasy, for example, which is like...
Yeah, like there are millions of words. About 9 months to a year with the whole thing, with the QA and all these things. Well, when I was working, it used to be 9 months. I would say maybe now, it might be 8 or something like that. But there is a lot of text, and also because now even Square Enix are working in the sim ship, the simultaneous shipment, and agile localization, which means, okay, we develop this, we send it for translation, but then they change it. So they send it back and you have to change it back. So, it takes a lot of time. But yeah, I would say yeah, 9 months, something like that, or big games or like that. It takes a long time. Also, the QA might be 3 months, 4 months, something like that, if it's done properly. And the translation, depending on how many people. Another trend that I don't quite like in the industry now is that they tend to fragment the games more and more. Like while before it used to be maybe 2 translators, 3 translators, now you might have teams of 6 translators, 7 translators, and of course the consistency issues, even if you use, cat tools or anything like that, but of course, and that's the risk. And they do it, of course, because it's the fastest you can and the cheapest kind of, that's from the side of the industry. So I think that has an impact on the quality that, then, and that's why the QA is so important, because if you have so many people, different styles, even if you agree, that also happens, I think, in subtitling with series, a series, because you might get different translators, or when you translate, you don't know how somebody else translated that term. Mm-hmm. So this consistency in the textual world, and I think it's a challenge.
Yeah, that's really challenging. That's really important for the final product, that everything is consistent, and there should be some kind of line, yes, of thought, if you like, but yeah. It's like that. I mean, in all audiovisual products, not only on video game or
subtitling, exactly.
Anything. And what about coding or code? Do you have to know anything about code or not?
Not really. But again, if you do know a little bit of XML, or well, if you knew about Unity or anything like that, it is the language that they use for developing, you would be the bee's knees. But most people who start, they don't know. Maybe you know a little bit of HTML or XML from seeing it. But the only thing is that you will come across, some tags and control codes, or sometimes, depending on who you work for and how they work, you will come across variables and things like that. And that's something that you need to be aware of, because a very common mistake, and kind of one of the things that they put in translation tests to catch people, is variables or tags. And then if people translate them, you're breaking the code. But if you don't know about games, you probably will translate it because you don't know what it is. And that's kind of the first filter, when you do a translation test. If they see, they don't know what a variable is, they don't know, what a control code or a tag is. And it's usually the ones we work with is related to kind of, change of line, change of message, put this in a color, italic, this kind of, or place this icon on screen. But definitely, if you're familiar with it, it does help. And the good thing is, usually when you start a project, they will give you a list, of if you're working with dirty text, which I call, of what each code or tag does, for example, italics end, and stuff like that. If you work with, MemoQ or MemSource or anything like that, usually the tags are hidden, so then you don't really need to worry about that. But for Japanese developers, like I always work, with the text, with the code in it, this kind of textual code, not the other deeper code, but the code for, the ID for the message, and the end line, the colors, all this, and you have to be so careful, because if you even delete one of any bit of that, you break the code, and the game could freeze with something as silly as that. So
yes, and many people worked on that code, and they will kill you.
Exactly.
Hours developing that code.
Exactly, and then the game freezes, and it just simply because maybe sometimes in Square Enix they use like the little kind of triangle thingies for the control codes, and if you just delete, for example, the final one or then the next message won't come on screen, and that's a game freeze for something as silly as that. But usually it's easy to detect as well, and it's easy to fix. That's a good thing.
Yeah. Yes, I can imagine. And what do you? I mean, you said you translated Final Fantasy for console and PC. Do you also translate apps?
I've never translated an app, but I know many game localizers who also work in apps, and also a lot of game apps, because actually the mobile sector in the gaming industry is the one that's actually now giving more revenue and also growing more. So the process is very much the same. If it's an app, of course, the language is different. If it's a video game, you have to be very careful about trying to facilitate immersion in the game, engagement. But if I'm translating a more utility app, that's not so important. So I think the language would be different, but the process would be very similar. And if it's a video game, the process is the same, but space restrictions are even harder. And another problem that we have with games for phones is that the handsets, they're so different that, it's very difficult to calculate, what might fit in one phone might be a truncation in the other phone, especially for Android. For iOS, not so much, because they have so that's a challenge as well, for any app or any game developed for the Android platform, is that the space limitations are hard to check on every possible handset. And then also you have to translate the descriptions for the App Store, for example, and also the Google ads for the apps or the games, which are like a tweet almost, like they have usually between 25 and 35 characters. And that also can be quite, you have to be quite creative to translate that. But the process is, is very similar.
Metadata for streaming or for streaming or TV, it's called metadata.
Exactly. So
you translate about it's a summary or a synopsis about what the product is about, and you have a limitation of characters, but it's much longer, of course, than in an app. I can imagine.
Exactly.
The video games I play are on the phone. I play just one. I'm not a gamer myself. I play on the phone. That's all my approach to video games.
Well, that's fine. Yeah, like sometimes I always say, one thing is playing them and the other one is translating them. You can kind of keep those separate.
Yeah, but you're always working with, because sometimes I read and I said, oh, that's like a nice choice of words, and you try to imagine what it says in English, for example.
Yes.
So that's cool. I love it. You have to be so creative to work on this field on video games. It's awesome.
It is, yeah. And then it's always struggling with the space restrictions, because of course the most beautiful solution that you'll come, with, it won't fit most of the time. So then you have to go, oh no, how I, But anyway, eventually you get there. So that's good.
Yeah, and what about names? Who decides the names of the characters, for example?
Yeah, that's usually the development team, the writers, the designers, and a lot as well the marketing teams, usually also have a saying in this, the name of the game, is it going to be translated or not, the game of characters. So it's usually them. Now, only if you see a problem, for example, sometimes as translators, you might think, ooh, that name in my culture, in my language, doesn't sound good or anything like that. And you might tell them, but they're quite reluctant to change them. But I remember in one of the early Final Fantasies that I worked on, there was a character called, it was Gitan in Japanese, but they had Romanize it, transcribe it as Zidane. But at that time, Zinedine Zidane, the football player, was really, really popular. So the French translators were there, no, this will not work in France because you associate, the name too much with the football player. And then, so they said, okay, then, you can change it and look for something that sounds similar in your own language. So things like that, it might happen. There was another case, another Japanese game, there's a witch that's called in Japanese Metallica, but it's written in katakana. So then it's not as bad as if you see Metallica, because it was transcribed as the name of the band. So then they were a bit worried that could this be some not copyright, but like, trademark or legal issues, because Metallica might say, so then they kind of change it to Metalia. So, when things like that happen, the translators, if you pick it up, you might say, there might be an issue here. They might listen to you, they might not. You never know. It's but usually it's the original development team, and the marketing team has a lot to do as well. Especially with the name of the game, which usually they don't get translated anymore. Like, for example, the Witcher. I don't know, for people, this is based on science fiction novels from Poland, and is developed by CD Projekt. And the name hasn't been translated, also because for internationalization. But within the game, it's translated as Brujo, no? Because you cannot really leave Witcher, maybe if everything else is in Spanish. But the name, it happens a lot, I think, with movies. The old days where they translated so differently, I think, are gone, no? More or less. Maybe not all movies, but I think they tend to stick closer because the hype, you generate, if it's the same name or characters.
I'm sorry. It happens that sometimes you mentioned The Witcher. The Witcher is now a series on Netflix.
Yes.
You have the books, then you have the video game, and now you have the series. So everything should be consistent. I don't know if I watched the series, I love it, but I haven't played the game. Everybody in this house played the game except me, of course. And they told me it's the best game ever, whatever.
Yeah, people love it. It's actually, it's a great name as well. No, it's a great game for people who like, fantasy worlds and things like that. It's actually, it's a huge success. And I think it's nice as well to see that it's not always Japanese, games, or, US or Canadian or French, whatever. That also, Poland or, other companies being successful with big titles.
Yeah, and it should be difficult to keep consistency between the terms in the game. Of course, you have access because, they are doing, I think, The Witcher 4 now. And so you have access to the terminology, and you have the books, which are also translated into different languages. So you have to do a lot of research.
Exactly. Yes. Again, that's it. Especially, with this, there's a lot of transmedia franchises, which are, as you were saying, no, game, book. This is kind of unusual because the series came after the game. Like usually it's more Harry Potter books, Harry Potter movies, Harry Potter games, or Lord of the Rings. But consistency is super important because fans know it by heart, from the first to the last. And if you call it a different name, for example, in the Harry Potter books, the names of some of the characters, or I guess in The Witcher is the same. So you have to be, super consistent. Again, so that's why I think good terminology management is so important, and also a final kind of review to unify, especially if you're working, with many translators. As an anecdote, for the Lord of the Rings games, and they had to be also very close. They're mainly more close to the movies than to the books, so kind of they took the movies as the base for some of them. But they did a test to the developers working on the game on Tolkien's world, because, they wanted developers who knew, well about, Tolkien, everything, the storylines, the characters, everything. So they did a test for any developers who were to work for that project for Electronic Arts. So it's very important, definitely, and they take it seriously.
Maybe I could have passed that test, maybe, because I'm Tolkien fan.
Good. So.
That's awesome. That's so cool because we love this. Some of us, or most of us, will love literature. Different genres, and to do what you love. And take that to the next step, like translating a video game or even developing a video game. Or it's great. It's not just something abstract or that comes. Some games that come from the imagination of the developers, but those which are based on books or movies. That's awesome. It's like
it is
to work on. That's great.
I agree. Like this, for example, there's a game that's also called Dante's Inferno, and they say that a lot of people know, more about Dante now because of the video game, and you think, how is this possible? But this is the society, 2.0 visual image. It's, people prefer to see something than read something, unfortunately, but or not, I don't know. But anyway, that's another discussion.
My son is 14 and he knows the names of gods, of Greek gods, because of God of War. And then when he had like a test at school, he knew everything because he played the game. I mean, so I said, well, okay, it's not so bad that he's playing.
Exactly. Yes, it has its advantages as well. That's it. Exactly. Oh, that's brilliant. And he learned it. Yeah, probably without much effort, just playing and having fun, which is the best motivation that you can get for learning, I guess.
And what happens with or with gender-neutral language and gender-neutral characters? How do you approach that? Because I know there are gender-neutral characters in video games, so how do you manage that?
Especially in Japanese games, you get a lot of gender neutral characters, and what often happens in translation, until now anyway, is that they were made, one gender or the other, because it's kind of, for us in Spanish at least, you need to, say either masculine or feminine. But also, I think in the US translators, for Nintendo, Birdo, who was like a friend of Yoshi or something, I think it's transgender character, but he was made, I think, female. And then in later releases, you know that, okay, they're kind of gender is neutral. So there's a lot of censorship, or I'm not sure, or adaptation, or it depends on how you call that, regarding this type of characters, not in Japanese games, but when they kind of come overseas, a lot of the time it's to do with the age ratings, for example, because, they usually don't want the age rating to go higher, because that means, smaller market and stuff like that. But I think it's less censored now, and also about language inclusion, gender perspective. I think it's improving. And for example, Assassin's Creed Odyssey, one of the most recent, you could play as a Cassandra or Alexios, as male or female, and in a lot of the translation, not all of it, but they made a big effort to keep it kind of gender neutral, because until now it's a very male dominated industry, even in the translation or localization. It's, you see sometimes more male than female, even though translation is usually populated more by, by female. So it's unusual, but it's been kind of, they think about men a lot when they develop games and when you translated games as well. And sometimes I work on this with my students, because when you do not know who the character they're talking to, if it's male or female or neutral, or if you don't know who the player is, you have to be very careful. And I'm surprised sometimes that even female translators, it's always masculine, feminine, masculine, singular. That's kind of the default. And it takes time to get used to, try and use, invariable, neutral, for example. Child, get yourself in bed, no? From child of light. And 90% of the students, niño, métete en la cama. And that's addressing the player. It could be niña, it could be, so why not cariño, amor, or something like that. So, we have to change and try to use this invariable language also as well, because a lot of the time you don't know who the character is talking to, and it looks very strange if it's a female and you talk refer to them as a male and stuff like that. And from the industry as well, I just read recently that the coming Call of Duty, they're gonna have he, she, or they. So you can play as, so this is brilliant because, it kind of can accommodates everybody. And now we're just wondering, what is it going to be in Spanish? Is it going to be elle? Maybe. Or something like that, or what's going to happen now? But it's definitely, I think, a step for inclusion, in the right direction. So some of the big, but of course, again, we're talking, these are companies who have a lot of experience and they've grown as well, in terms of how to localize their products. But if you get an indie developer, probably, or small developer, they don't know about localization and they don't know much yet, but it's little by little, I guess. But I'm happy to say that I think the industry, even developers, are beginning to take gender issues, and not only male, female, but people who do not feel comfortable, being qualified in one or the other. I must say again as well, though, that in the Assassin's Creed first, the idea was that the main character was only a female, and in the end they decided to include a male because they thought people wouldn't like it. It would not be well received that the main character was only, even though we have Lara Croft. So I don't know, but anyway, they thought it wouldn't be. But it's changing, but very, very slowly.
Yeah, very, very slowly. That's right. But anyway, it's changing. That's
yes, which I think we need to keep the positive. It is changing, and I put a lot of emphasis in this. For people who do training, if we kind of get students to become aware of this, then you have a translator who's going to be kind of gender aware when they're translating, and that's kind of half of the battle won. Then. We'll keep educating the customer. That's harder battle.
Because we are approaching the hour and Instagram leaves us like 60 minutes only. So what would be your advice for someone who wants to start working on video game translator? Maybe a student, well, you are a professor at university, so I think you give advice all the time, or maybe some experienced translator who does subtitles or not and wants to try out video games. What do you think?
Yeah, I think why not? You should go for it. And there are different ways. Like, one of them, of course, is do kind of a mailing to all the translation agents. Usually it's easier to start with an agency than directly with the client. But why not? Also check the pages. Like Nintendo, often they have ads for, but usually it's in-house translators, but, you might be happy to try, this and go to Frankfurt. Usually Nintendo Europe is based in Frankfurt. But basically what I would do is check the websites, send emails, with your CV to Keywords, who is the biggest vendor, for game localization. And they have a lot, because Binari Sonori, Babel Media, Synthesis Spain, they all used to be independent, but SDL, they also do things with games. Transperfect is now starting to do things with games. So I would just kind of ping noise in Spain, send and do translation tests. Also, it's very important, in LinkedIn, in Twitter, follow, these companies because they often advertise, their job vacancies there. Like I saw recently, one position for Spanish linguist in Keywords Barcelona, and 200 people, which I found a bit scary, had expressed an interest for this. So I was thinking, oh my goodness. But anyway, if you kind of follow and then, you have to do the translation test, but also kind of keep up to date, even if you don't translate, but keep up to date reading kind of what's going on in the industry, because if you do get to do an interview, even if you don't play, like I still, I'm not a casual gamer, but I really keep up to date. Another good way to start is go to small game developer conferences or big ones. And, bringing your translation card and, and get to talk, especially with indie developers are also a very good way to start, or via Steam, contact them, or via Twitter. And not for professional translators, but I know of students who have said, okay, I'll do the first game for free, but for the second game, I wouldn't recommend this, but I know of people who have done it and it's worked out well for them. But I don't know, especially if you are an established translator, I wouldn't recommend this. But but yes, going to development conferences and kind of talking about them, and because usually localization is worth their while, but they haven't thought about it, or especially indie developers. So give it a go.
Yes, and what about doing credits? Are you included in the credits or not?
That's another very, very controversial issue. Yes, if you work in-house, if usually that's life, as I said, the Rolls Royce is much easier if you work for Blizzard or if you work for Square Enix. Then yes, like my name appears in all the Square Enix games that I've translated. But if you work for a translation agency, no. Usually, sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But a lot of the time, it's the translation agency that doesn't want your name to be there. And even some of them have these agreements with translators that then they cannot work directly for, you know, for that client for an amount of years and all that. So again, there's agencies that are better for that than others. So sometimes it's also good to know. The bad news as well is that there are no authorial rights on games. For example, in Spain, you know, thanks to ATRAE, the Asociación de Traductores y tal, they fought a lot for, you know, the rights for subtitlers and adjusters and dubbers. But for video games, because it's considered software, there's no nothing like that. Because I was thinking I'd be a millionaire with the Final Fantasy, but no, I'll be always poor. But you know, there's nothing you can do about that. But at least my name appears on it, and so it depends. It's very hit and miss. But I think it's something that we should fight for because you know it's I think it's a moral right or something like that by law. At least in Spain and Europe, I think in the US it's a little bit different. All these copyright and authorship law and all that, but. Yeah. It's your work, so you should be credited for it, I think.
Yes, of course, I agree. But I know that the translators are not credited. That's why I asked.
Yes. Yes.
It happens that now you can see the name of the translator in most streaming platforms, but not in all of them.
Yeah. So, game translators are really invisible. Unless I say you work directly for the customer, and then that's no problem. But if not, and you're not even allowed to say what games you worked on for, I don't know, 8 years or something crazy like that, depending on the NDA that you have to sign.
Okay, so that was so cool, so interesting. I mean, we learned everything about video games, I think. You can tell me, everyone listening or watching, if you liked it, because I really want to thank you for your time. It was like very, very enlightening. I have
thank you for having me.
Localization for more 50 games, but no credit ever. No,
I know that's not right. You know, that's not right.
No, we know. So again, thank you. This is awesome. I mean, I love this field, and you were really kind to tell us everything, because you tell us everything about video games. So thank you, Carme. Good luck with your conferences at ATA 61st. And
thank you. Thank you all for having me and for listening to me. And sorry for all the technical, hiccups that we had.
It's okay. It was just a very short time. Don't worry. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Bye-bye. Sorry I couldn't answer questions. Next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.